Hello, and welcome to our Building Strong Foundations Early Childhood Mental Health webinar series. This is our second in our webinar series offering, focusing on the power of attachment, how early relationships shape the brain. This is being recorded so that any of you that signed up with the intention to join us today are able to access this information at a later date, because we know that in this work, intentions can be there and things come up. So if you're listening post-recording, thank you for joining. And thank you to Haley, our project director, and many others who have supported the visioning of this webinar series. We hope that this helps support you in developing your competence and confidence around this specific subset of family and child supports, focusing on infant and early childhood mental health. As I said, this is part of an ongoing series. We're offering 12 different integrated webinars that focus from the first that was just 2 weeks ago on the foundation, defining infant and early childhood mental health. Today, we're delving into attachment and relationships. In 2 weeks, we'll focus on reframing behavior, and you can see the other offerings here. We hope that you're able to join us for all of them and that you find them beneficial to your work. If you weren't able to join us for the first session, I wanted to take a minute to just introduce myself. I am Kate Sweeney, a clinical social worker by training. I am on faculty at University of Connecticut School of Social Work and have experience both in clinical settings, focusing on infants and very young kids and their families that work embedded within school, Head Start, and pediatric and primary care settings, as well as this work within the community, having supported 2 different systems of care myself. It's great to be able to dedicate this work and call it a day job, right? Our goal in the next hour is, as I said, to build on the foundational webinar that we recorded 2 weeks ago, focusing on the power of attachment. When you think about infant and early childhood mental health, attachment and early relationships are a key principle or value of that work. But we want to spend a little bit of time today really delving into what that means, how that initiates impact on how we understand early brain development and a child's understanding of the world. And I'll read the objectives to you here. So by the end of this webinar hour, we hope that you'll be able to first explain how secure attachment and co-regulation support early brain development and emotional regulation in infants and young children. Second, to recognize how attachment experiences influence behavior and stress responses, but coming to that with an understanding and focus on strengths-based and non-pathologizing lenses, so that we're thinking about what can we do to prevent and support and scaffold this work. As all early childhood work is really aimed at prevention and early intervention. And third, to identify relationship-based caregiving strategies to strengthen attachment and promote emotional safety across home and early care settings. So with that, we'll get right into it. This is a slide that you saw in our previous webinar, if you joined us for the first one, really just anchoring us for this next hour on the different principles and core values within infant and early childhood mental health, or IECMH. We know that relationships are central, that development happens within the context of a child's family, culture, and community, and that, as I said just a minute ago, all of this is really anchoring on a strengths-based approach and really focusing on prevention before intervention, that we want kids and their families and the folks that are working to support them to get supported along the way, rather than have something be so bad that it looks clinical at a very early age. We know better, we know more that can be done. So that's what a lot of our work really focuses around. This definition gives us a grounding for early childhood or infant and early childhood mental health. You also saw this last webinar as well, but wanting to offer this as a grounding as we're introducing the role and sort of operation of attachment within this. This is a definition that was developed by a number of different folks that are considered pivotal in this work and adapted by 0 to 3 at the national level. The saying, and I'll read it to you here, is that in the course of the first 5 years, early childhood mental health is the developing capacity of a child to do 3 things. First, form close relationships, and we'll talk about relationships in the context of attachment in the next hour. Second, to experience, tolerate, and express a range of emotions without lasting collapse. And the last part of that phrase is really the most important. We want kids and adults to be able to experience a range of emotions, not just the happy and tolerable ones, but the feeling of frustration, of fatigue, of your feelings being hurt when you are told no by a friend, etc. That all of those emotions are natural and should be taught as recognizable and tolerable in their bodies. And so how do we not have a lasting collapse from that? So how do we have the identification, the resolution, and recovery, and then return to baseline so that they can engage in their environment and learn, which is the third task in this definition. So what is attachment, right? Attachment is a word that's used often within different phrases or movie themes and sort of things like that. But what do we mean by it when we're coming from the perspective of the psychological and brain science rooted nature of infant mental health? I'll read it to you here. It's the enduring emotional tie to a caregiver characterized by a tendency to seek and maintain closeness, especially during times of stress. And this is important to think about a baby, right? Infants are innately have behaviors to evoke responses that promote survival. They're very different than other animals in that they remain dependent on the adults in their lives, especially those that are closest to them, to provide them support around their survival tasks of feeding, sleeping, etc., for at least the first full year of life, if not longer. So all of the sort of biological cues around reading adults' cues, developing closeness and dependence on those adults is very biologically driven. That there's implications for the infant's sense of security from those patterns. And there's, this develops into what we in this field call an internal working model. How do I understand the working nature of the world? So the way that adults respond, the typical and sort of anticipatory things within my environment. And that's all based on the initial attachment dynamic between a caregiver and a child. This is a brief video that is supported by the Wisconsin Association for the Advancement of Infant Mental Health. Sorry, it took me a minute to get their acronym correct. But it just looks at the idea of defining attachment and attunement, and I'll play this here for you.
Attachment and attunement are the cornerstones for healthy parent-child relationships. Attachment refers to the intimate emotional connections between children and their caregivers. Connections that make it possible for a child to feel safe and secure in the presence of their caregiver, even in new or scary situations. These connections can be forged, reinforced, ruptured, or repaired in every interaction, and they are particularly crucial during a child's earliest stages as they set the tone for their long-term development and future relationships. Attunement, a caregiver's ability to notice and respond to a child's needs or recognize shifts in their behavior, is one of the strongest influences on attachment between parent and child. It's important for caregivers to know that even when everything is going right, perfect attunement between two humans is incredibly rare. No one gets it right all the time, but you can continue to build attunement with active listening. Learn to recognize subtle, nonverbal cues from babies and small children by giving them your full, undivided attention. Empathy. Understanding your child's needs starts with empathizing and validating those needs when they are expressed. Open communication. Children learn how to regulate, communicate, and express their own emotions by watching their caregivers. Attachment and attunement are part of the ongoing relationship you're building with your child. Learn more at weaim.org.
That did a nice job of very briefly, succinctly, and professionally defining attachment and this idea of attunement, that a caregiver sort of cueing into a child's responses and needs. So wanting now with that base to launch into a little bit around how we've come to understand attachment theory by the contributions of some key and often British psychologists in the field in the early years. And you can see based on the numbers and on the screen in front of you that a lot of this work began in the 60s, 70s, and 80s and was really sort of pivotal in our understanding of meaning making of babies' behaviors that we've, in during that time within the field of psychology and psychiatry, really moved to try to understand not only adults in this field and work, but how do we come to understand very young kids that are not able to communicate their behavior in the same way, but often demonstrate it through patterns. A couple of key folks here are illustrated on the slide in front of you. And I should say that the slides will be distributed to you either with this recording or for those of you that are here with us now. And all of these link directly to these journal articles for your reference if you wanted to read and learn more. Mary Ainsworth is the person in the early 60s who defined the term a secure base from which to explore. And she uses that as a way of defining this sort of fundamental relationship that the caregiver, I'm guessing dad that you see in the picture here, is the secure base. And really from that relationship allows the child not only to feel secure with them, but to feel secure with to explore their environment. And that's a key role of the attachment figure, that you're not only safe with me, but we're safe here together. And so we can explore the materials in this room and the other people in this room and learn and engage with them and from them. We're naturally social creatures, but we are dependent on our attachment figures to give us the green light to do that. John Bowlby, who many of you may have at least heard his name, contributed a number of sort of pivotal pieces, both in the late 60s and early 80s when I was young enough to be a baby studied in this work as well. He described attachment as a unique relationship between an infant and his caregiver that is the foundation of further healthy development. And so it's important to note that like scientists, even in this very early years, were not only tying this to like a baby's understanding of human behavior and therefore their behavior in the world, but their trajectory with respect to developmental domains and of course, long-term health and developmental outcomes, right? So babies are as healthy as this relationship is, essentially. Bowlby described attachment theory as an inherent biological response to a behavior system in place to provide satisfaction of basic human needs, right? So all of this is really, as we said, biologically rooted and around this idea of, are my basic needs met? The hierarchy of needs is presenting here as well. And once all of those things are in place, you can then sort of get into the more sort of piecemeal parts of that. Mary Main, who studied under Ainsworth, found that adult attachment representations were often distributing or illustrating the context of how adults remember their own childhood experiences. And if anyone has been a parent or primary caregiver of a child themselves, you're often called to recall like your experience at their age when you're parenting a kid at a certain sort of time frame, right? And so she's the first to kind of really document this and explore this from a psychological framework perspective, noting that it's influencing the attachment categorization of their own kids, right? So this idea of intergenerational relationships coming into play in how these sort of third generation children are presented with respect to their understanding of the world, their attachment patterns and behaviors that again are initially so tied to this first relationship, but then come into play with peers, with educators, with other adults. John Bowlby, and additionally, again, so they're sort of all building upon each other's work during this time, really coined the term internal working model, as I referenced on the other slide, that looks at how an individual develops their understanding not only of key relationships but of themselves in the world, their self-worth, their self-efficacy, their, how important am I to sort of be responded to in response to experiences and behaviors that their key or main attachment figures have towards them. And so again, we're seeing this as shaping that individual's world clearly, shaping multi-generational spaces, having impact on sort of not only my psychological sort of meaning making or schema of the world, but my future to health and development. So no pressure, but attachment is very, very important, as we've established here. And this idea that, there's so many ways that parents and caregivers and primary key people are not only contributing to a child's experience based on sort of the biological or epigenetic or cellular level, but the environment and their interactions with them are sort of cueing into sort of brain circuitry and structure and how they learn social behaviors, right? So thinking about this at this sort of this 3-step level of cells, brain development, and social behaviors. How do I attune to stress? Like, what are appropriate ways that I'm learning from my caregivers to respond to stress, to experience and explore the world, to know how I'm responded to, and all those feed into a child's sense of themselves, their self-esteem, their self-control, and social skills, which are all really what they're supposed to walk into kindergarten with, ready to demonstrate without distress. And if they don't, then that's when we begin to sort of, think about interventions for that child at the individual level, or sort of blame them for not fitting the environment, when so much of that has to do with not only their home environment in the moment, but their sort of experiences in their first several years of life. We know that children grow and thrive in the context of dependable relationships. Without at least one such relationship, development is disrupted and consequences can be severe and long lasting. We can see this in comparisons of brain sizes, of brain activity, of again, sort of all other domains around health and development that are measured. And all of this is, as we think about relational health, we think about co-regulation, we think about an adult that's attuned to a child, that can repair after rupture. We'll talk about that more, and that can share in moments of joy with that child. And when those things are not present is when we get concerned about sort of the manifestations of that in an individual child. Then the book that's quoted here on this page, Neurons to Neighborhoods, is linking this idea that the connection between neurons in your brain, or sort of the connections between an individual's brain and their environment. Q for neighborhoods, because neurons to environment didn't sound as catchy as neurons to neighborhoods. But this idea that it's not only that interpersonal connection, but sort of the cues and signals in an environment are immediately, though we can't see it, really wiring or firing or impacting the development and meaning making in that child's brain. When protective factors and relationships are not provided, we can see deficits in sort of stress hormones and the cellular responses to those things. And so we're grateful to the scientists that did this work to back up the legitimacy of supporting relationships in the early years. This is a quick video that's worth sharing with you all around the Circle of Security, which is an international parenting model. I know Jen and a few others offer this in your community. It's great for any parent, really, and really helps them look at their parenting patterns or caregiver patterns of a young child and examine their own experiences. So sort of putting into practice all the work of Mary Ainsworth and Maine and Bowlby that we read about in the previous slide. And I'll play this for you here.
Parents, we all wonder if we're getting it right. We want to know we're meeting our children's needs, helping them grow, and giving them all that we can. We try to combine our own experience of being parented with the advice of others and our own instincts and beliefs about what is best. And still, we so often worry that we're not succeeding. In a world that is always offering the next best parenting solution, the Circle of Security is based on decades of attachment research. Unlike many behavioral perspectives, it offers relationship tools to provide a new way of understanding your children's needs, creating lasting security for them and more satisfaction for you. The circle graphic has been created to help you know what to look for so you can read your children's behavior to guide you in meeting their needs. It's really not complicated. People of all ages have attachment needs. These needs can be divided in 3 ways. Let's look at this child. First, he needs to know the freedom and confidence to go out and explore his world. Second, he needs to feel assured that whenever he's ready, he can come back for comfort and protection. Third, he needs his caregiver to be in charge in a kind way. 3 basic needs that can be thought of as going out on the circle, coming in on the circle, and hands on the circle. Let's have a look in more detail. Feeling safe and supported, our children want to discover their world. When going out, they need to know that their exploration is encouraged, that we're right there watching over them, delighting in them, offering help when needed, and ready to enjoy their new adventures with them. And when they're coming in, they need us to refill their emotional cup. This means organizing their emotions and letting them know we are delighted to welcome them back, protect, comfort, and understand them. The key for us as parents is to remain strong and kind while knowing when to encourage their going out into the world and how to be available to welcome them back to us. It's crucial that we learn to identify our children's needs like this, because misreading them, or worse, missing them altogether, can cause pain and frustration. We all know how uncomfortable it can be to be held too close when we want to be out exploring, or kept at a distance when we need emotional support, or simply to be without someone who is bigger, stronger, wiser and kind, who we can trust to understand what we need when we're feeling lost, confused, or out of control. When a child misbehaves, the cause is often rooted in how safe and secure they're feeling. So it's not surprising that they behave well when a parent learns to tune into their child's needs on the circle in this way. And because our needs on the circle never disappear, learning to read cues can help you better understand and meet the needs of people of all ages, including your own. So that's all there is to it. Just know that at any given moment, your child is somewhere on the circle asking you to meet a need. Support my going out. Welcome my coming in. Be the hands that keep me safe by staying in charge and committed to helping me feel connected. And please remember this, there's no such thing as perfect parenting. At Circle of Security, we've come to realize that good enough is, well, good enough. All of us are going to miss needs on the circle time and again. Welcome to the club. But if we meet our children's needs enough of the time, the results will be happier, healthier, more secure children, and parents too.
So a couple of key, things that are selected there, and just again, a very short video highlighting the work of the Circle of Security model, but that, the goal is to understand and respond to your child in the moment. We know that that's not always perfect. And so it's, good enough is good enough, as they say, really releasing some of the pressure to get any one given moment correctly. And we'll talk, in a little bit about the value actually of embracing those misattunements as well. So how do we measure attachment? And this has been done in a range of ways. You see Mary Ainsworth name up here as well again. She developed what's called the strange situation procedure, which sounds like something from science fiction, but it's actually real. It's a lab study, not a chemical lab, but a lab in a psychological place where there's sort of what looks like sort of a natural play setting, and usually a two-way mirror where you're able to observe what's happening inside the room and outside of the room. Typically, a caregiver and child are brought into the room and, initially sort of engaging in some of the toys. usually there's a what they call stranger or grad student of sorts in the room that then replaces that known caregiver. So the caregiver is asked to leave the room without sort of explaining what they're doing to the child or infant. And what they're watching for is not only the child's response when the caregiver leaves, because often that is, wait, the door closed, where did my person go, right? That's normal. Uh, but especially clinically indicating is, what did it look like when my caregiver came back into the room? So did I go to you for comfort? Was I upset and angry with you for leading me and not explaining? Did I not engage with you? Was I sort of avoidant of that interaction? And that speaks to kind of really these attachment categories that have become developed by the field. And I will share a bit more with you here. Whoops. So that this attachment theory and these attachment categories explain ideally the positive parental or caregiver infant attachment as a dyadic relationship. You'll hear the term dyadic come up a lot in infant mental health. We really sort of don't consider our babies or very young kids by themselves, but where are they within this relationship? So as you can see here, this is actually a triad in front of you on the screen, but how do I understand them in context of their dyad? The work is considered dyadic. And that with respect to cognitive, social, and behavioral domains, securely attached babies or infants tend to have more favorable long-term outcomes, while insecurely attached babies, that sort of spills into the work of the rest of their body and development, because so much of the base is not sort of settled, and so you're building a house on sort of less stable foundation. The child knows most of the time is the goal that they have something, the caregiver is sensitive, available, and will be responsive. And the term sensitive here is, you saw this play into the circle security video where, the caregiver has to be sensitive to meet the child as much as possible within sort of the sort of emotional state that they're in. So if the child is coming back to you to kind of, have some help, they're a little bit overwhelmed or overstimulated or upset by the environment, they need you to kind of read that and name their feelings and regulate them and sort of settle them down and reinforce that they're safe. If a child wants to celebrate with you that, did you see how fast I went through that slide, right? You have to kind of meet them there as well. So this idea of not only being responsive and available, but also being sensitive, like how much am I able to match where you are? And you can anticipate from the adult side that a lot of that is impacted by either the adult's mental state at the moment, their it can be their sensitivity to all these things can be removed when there's things like substance use or sort of numbing out or sort of avoidance in other ways, whether it be withdrawal based on depression or severe anxiety or things like that. So this is where the adult's own internal working model comes into play in this dance. These are broadly the categories that we understand attachment statuses to live in, right? So you can see here, secure attachment is the ideal, that a child becomes distressed when a parent leaves, but is easily comforted when the parent returns. So thinking about that the stranger experiment in the lab, when the known caregiver returns, they're able to say, "Oh, you're here, thank you," and thinking about like what we see typically in very young kids that are being picked up from childcare or sort of group-based care during the day, that there's a mom, you're here, right? Even, or dad, you're here, grandmom, you're here, whoever it might be. Avoidant is another category. So the child is not distressed when parent leaves, so they're kind of avoiding reaction to any of this. That this is the child's covert way of managing their own anxiety, right? That they've learned to not be super dependent on that adult for regulation or organizing of their own internal state. Moving down, so we're going sort of clockwise. Disorganized kids, disorganized attachment looks like it sounds like it's hard to predict, and this is where it becomes where there's been a pattern of it's sometimes available, sometimes not, right? And so like the child looks disorganized because they don't really know, do I go to this adult? Are they safe in this moment or not? And so they become, there's not a pattern for them to kind of cue into. So even though the avoidant child in the sort of yellow box above is withdrawn, they learn those sort of internal mechanisms because there's been a consistent pattern of that adult not being available to them. And so the disorganized one is that they're sometimes available, sometimes not. And so how do I make meaning of this? They're sort of left with more of a mess than not. And the anxious resistant attachment category, the child is distressed when the parent leaves and seeks to punish the parent for displaying overt feelings such as anger, right? So this is the child where the parent comes back and says, I'm mad at you for leaving, right? Or might be hit or aggressive. And the parent kind of, or adult kind of doesn't know how to react in the moment. Sorry, I feel like I'm being very illustrative with my hands, but I'm trying to kind of embody that moment for you all a bit. This idea that like, there's a range of feelings, but I don't know how to express it because I don't trust you to give it to you, right? Whereas in the secure dynamic, I'm upset and I'm trusting you to comfort me, right? Because there's been that pattern, and hopefully, what folks know from the global circle security group, at least the very brief video that you saw, is that we're not going to land on secure patterns all the time. But if we focus on kind of understanding the cues of my child in that moment and meeting them there, then it'll be more secure than not, right? So it's not about the perfect parent, but it's the good enough parent. We're going to talk through in these next couple of slides just sort of what this pattern looks like. So secure attachment. So a child, and we're starting at noon and going clockwise. So a child cries or is frightened. The caregiver responds with positive affect and a calm demeanor. The child feels comforted. This happens consistently over time, and then the secure relationship is established, right? So there's a pattern that's predictable and reinforcing. Insecure or ambivalent attachment. So the child cries or is frightened. The caregiver responds appropriately. Sometimes the child is sometimes comforted, sometimes not, right? And so it might be that, could be an adult that is dealing with episodic substance use or episodic depression, right? So it's not consistent, but that there might be some withdrawal or some appropriate moments of appropriate response, right? Things are inconsistent over time. Child is trying to keep parent interested, and child's not secure in the relationship. So, not sure if do I go at a level 10? Do I go back down, etc. Insecure or avoidant attachment. So child cries or is frightened. Caregiver does not respond appropriately. Child is not comforted. This happens consistently over time. Child learns to avoid. So again, this idea that, I'm better off keeping this to myself and sort of sorting this out by myself because this adult is not going to be responsive to my needs. And child ends up not being secure with that relationship. Insecure or disorganized attachment is a child cries or is frightened. Caregiver responds, is scared or, in some sort of scary or odd or bizarre way, right? Sort of over the top. And sometimes this can be done with good intention, but just a lack of awareness of what's developmentally appropriate for a 2 or 4 or 5-year-old. Child is frightened or confused. This happens over time, and the child does not feel secure in the relationship. So this is where you get this, like, I want your help, but I don't like your response. What do I do? And that we know that when trauma and attachment are in the interplay, just as is indicated with some of the initial research around intergenerational sort of implications of attachment and patterns, it disrupts the process of learning and trust for both the adult and the child. And it can be, when it's in place, when attachment is there, it can be a protective factor against sort of traumatic results or experiences. And when it's not in place, it can really sort of splinter and magnify a traumatic response in a very young child. We're going to play for you here a still face video. This is a more recent one that was done with dads, but just looks at, just the implications of how cued in very young kids, especially in the first 2 years of life, are to just the emotional state of their caregivers and what that looks like when they are not getting sort of the feedback that they're used to and what that does. So we'll talk here.
What we've learned over the years is that babies are much more capable than we initially imagined, but they're also much more vulnerable. And in Edtronic's still face experiment, we get to see both in a very short period. We see the baby and the dad playing together in their routines. There are things that they know about each other and things that they do together, and it's fun. And then we ask the dad to turn away, and when he turns back, to keep his face completely still and not respond to the baby. And the results are almost immediate, and they're devastating. The baby looks to the dad and tries to get the dad to get back into those games. Hey, we were just playing just a minute ago, weren't we? We were having fun. What's going on? And then the baby starts to get frustrated when that doesn't work. So she'll have to look away and look around the room and find something else and then look back and say, now can we play? And within 3 minutes, the baby has really dissolved. She is trying to get out of the chair. She's uncomfortable. She's reaching out to dad. She's crying. And then we ask the dad to turn away again. And when he turns back, to go back to being regular dad. And it's a joyous reunion. They get back into their routines, the things that they do together, the things that they were just doing 3 minutes before. And the baby settles down and gets back to the comfort zone that she's developed with the dad. What we see in the still face experiment is how able the child is to initiate and be part of the relationship between the father and the child, but also how much she depends on that relationship in order to keep an even keel. And when she's grounded and comfortable, she can explore the world. She can meet new people. She can try new things, and she's got that safe base that she can always rely on. And there's a trust level there. We can only begin to imagine what it's like for babies whose life is like that 3 minutes all of the time. And they don't get that responsiveness, and they don't get any help getting back to an even keel. And the results can be very tragic. They can have trouble trusting people, they can have trouble relating to people, and they can have trouble being calm enough so that they can explore the world and take part in the world. So we know that those initial relationships, that initial responsiveness and interaction between the father and the baby are keys to the baby's success as a child and as an adult.
So perhaps a bit more intense than you anticipated in a lecture around attachment. But again, like just underscoring the stress of, or the importance rather, the indications of adult well-being and adult affect and presentation on the meaning making of our young kids. That often when we are thinking about the implications of the recent sort of time points and experiences of COVID and expressing how stressed and, or I'm sorry, how kids are showing up into now pre-K and kindergarten spaces with significant developmental delays and behavior concerns. And that the workforce feels sort of really overwhelmed by that. You know, a lot of this is, yes, there was a removal of routines. There was not an opportunity to see early developmental delays. All those things are true. And the impact of the stress of the adults in the environments in which kids were living also has significant impact on just their understanding of the world they're meeting, making their schema, and therefore their ability to self-regulate and co-regulate in those moments. So we're going to end with what we can do, right? So we talked about this idea that infant mental health is really grounded in understanding the dynamic between relationships and brain science, and also the importance of having prevention happen, right? Having sort of a strengths-based work happen. So we're going to spend the next couple moments just talking through that, how you can, in whatever role you're in, working with very young kids and families, intervene or sort of turn the dial up on some efforts to support attachment in practice. But this is done through seemingly simple things. So again, if you think about the sort of disruption patterns that we talked about with respect to attachment, we're going to reverse engineer those, right? So we know that consistent and predictable responses help sort of scaffold attachment and the sort of infant secure base. We know that this can also be done at any time in a relationship, that like even if a caregiver is reflecting on their dynamic between their 8-year-old, their 10-year-old, if these things come into place, like that can be corrected over time. So nothing is set in stone, though the brain is sort of cued to learn these things very early on. That this idea of focusing on attunement and a caregiver's responsiveness to a child in the moment. So maybe I can't give you what you want, but I can say, I see you and I understand why you're upset, can pay dividends there. And the idea, and we'll talk as well about the importance of repair after rupture. And this is Dr. Becky, who is well known in the field of child mental health, talking about this idea and really giving a great script for you to either use in your own work or to share with caregivers and parents and families that you work with, how to embrace this idea of repair and what to say.
Repair is the act of going back to a moment of disconnection, taking responsibility for your behavior, and acknowledging the impact it had on another. Apology often looks to shut a conversation down. A good repair opens one up. There's no exact formula. I often think about 3 elements. Name what happened, take responsibility, state what you would do differently the next time. It could come together like this. Hey, I keep thinking about what happened the other night in the kitchen. I'm sorry I yelled. I'm sure that felt scary, and it wasn't your fault. I'm working on staying calm, even when I'm frustrated. A 15-second intervention can have a lifelong impact.
So again, what she does really, really well there is give you the sort of simple script. But 15 seconds is just a moment of sort of saying, not trying to move past a situation, which often caregivers try to do for a good intention. I don't want to dwell on an upsetting moment. I want to sort of move forward. But how do I just say, whether it's, she gave a reference of the other day or the other moment, right? Or a little while ago or this morning or just now, I reacted in a way that was bigger than I meant to. I'm having a stressful day and I didn't mean to have that spill out on you. I apologize. I would love to help you clean up the puzzle or whatever it might be, And then this idea that those simple moments of repair can mean dividends in that relationship, meaning for the very young child who's so cued in to not only how is my adult feeling about me, how are they interacting with me, but how are they doing in general. So often co-regulation in action includes naming feelings. So I know that you're upset right now that, it's raining, we can't go outside, but there's, that is what it is. And so we can be upset together and then we can make different plans, right? So you're just going to name the feel, like adding labels and sort of a cognition of how they're feeling is key here. Staying present during distress. So not moving past, it's fine, like we'll fix it or whatever, but just I see that you're upset and I understand, do you want a hug, right? And just letting the child have that moment. Supporting calm before teaching skills, right? So acknowledging that you need to sort of help a child regulate before you can say, let's think through why that went badly, right? You can't just, push a friend or climb over a friend if you want to, be the next in line for the swing, right? But first you have to sort of help them regulate in that moment first. that parents and caregivers really facilitate regulation through all of these things, including modeling, managing predictable and consistent routines. A lot of this is dependent on their own self-efficacy of themselves as parents, which we'll talk a lot more about in this series. The confidence within that particular parent-child relationship, and you'll see that come into play when they'll say like, well, this was easier with her sister, right? Or I understood this before with her brother, right? So that the dynamic between this particular child and them and their temperaments and goodness of fit and life circumstances all come into play there, and their own ability in the moment to manage their own emotions, which we know we've been doing this a long time ourselves as adults and can work fine in some moments and not in others, right? And so all that is really dependent on how we facilitate a child's experience at any given moment at any time. So invite you to just think a little bit as we're closing and sharing the evaluation survey in just a moment about, one thing that you heard today that you'll take with you in your work or role. Many of these things, again, are sort of foundational to being human, or might be something that you know innately, but maybe now know the science behind. But maybe if, just again, turning the dial up with intention in your work or in your role could be helpful. And my email address is there if you have any questions. And again, the slides and resources are all available to you as well. Thank you so much for your time today.